Hey guys, how's it going? And welcome to a new deck profile video. So I haven't done one of these in a while. I'm hoping to get back into the swing of things, as is with a lot of things that we're doing. And this one's actually a special one. It is a deck profile from a patron. So the patron's name is Jason Fruit. He is in the reward tier. That if he is in that tier, then he can do a deck or submit a deck for us to do a deck profile. And he actually did really awesome where he sent the deck, but he also had a cool little write-up that I was able to take and turn into an article on our website. So if you guys want the deck list, including the gacha log as well as his write-up, just click the link in the description below, and that'll take us to the website where he wrote that article, and it's got the breakdown that basically I'm about to go over in this deck profile here. I'm basically just going to use his breakdown as the basis since he knows the deck better than I do. He actually used this deck at the GP in Minneapolis. I forget what his exact score was, but he did pretty good, all things considered, and he did some changes which are part of this updated list that he sent me here. So yeah, we'll go ahead and jump right into it. Before we get started, as always, if you guys are looking for forceable singles or sealed product, including cards that we might be seeing inside of this deck profile and pre-orders for the new set that will be coming out in January, be sure to check out the link in the description below for Happy Little Hug Factory. They're really awesome and great at supporting the game, so make sure you show them a lot of love, and make sure you click that link in the description below so they know we sent you over. So obviously the ruler is Frayla. If you don't know, at the end of each of your turns you may put target Dark Elf from your graveyard into your hand. If you do, this card deals 300 damage to you. And also I apologize if the quality isn't super great on this images. I'm trying to get this, we'll see if I can fix it in future videos, but for now, yeah. And the flip side is 1000 attack, 800 defense, and whenever this card enters the field, put target Dark Elf from your graveyard into the field. And whenever this card attacks, another target Dark Elf you control gains 400, 400, and swiftness until end of turn. You can also pay red to give her swiftness until end of turn, and you can pay red and black to deal 100 damage multiplied by the number of Dark Elves you control to your opponent. So a lot of interesting mechanics there. But yeah, so going into the main deck, we'll go by quantity and work our way down from there. So first up, we have Faith in Darkness. So he basically just put that this has obvious synergy with Jeanne d'Arc, which is also inside of this deck. And running 4 in this deck is pretty good as there are so many 2-drops inside of this deck. So that's pretty good reasoning, I would say. Next is Ray the Black Owl, which obviously flips over into 0 as well. And for this one, he basically just said this card is hard to deal with. It's a fantastic way to keep your board alive when dealing with decks with lots of spot removal, especially inside of this deck where you have things that abilities like the J ruler I just read off, where it's reliant on having Dark Elves in the field you control. Not that that's a big part of the deck necessarily, but little things like that it just makes it tough on your opponent, especially now with Final Battle gone. It makes it so that field removal is a lot harder now, and a lot of stuff targets, or even if it's not something that targets to remove, your opponent has a lot of other effects they could be trying to do, so it's just great to have. Plus, it's a 2-drop that turns into an 8/9 flyer, which that alone is definitely worth your money. Next up, we have Jeanne d'Arc. And so this is the one that mentioned with Faith in Darkness, obviously, but is just a really good card on its own. And he put it's the main backbone of the mid-game of this deck. So this deck consistently has enough creatures on board to trigger both its swiftness and indestructible ability. So it gains swiftness and cannot be destroyed as long as you have 3 or more J resonators, so that includes itself. So you just have to have 2 other resonators on the field, or J resonators actually, so you could be judgmented, have 1 resonator, and then you have her on the field, and suddenly she cannot be destroyed. And so it's just pretty it's a great card, honestly, and definitely, you know, you can understand why they run it. Next up, we've got Majin Dark Elf. So this is the one that has swiftness, and you can only play this card if damage was dealt to you this turn, because it's a 1-drop 6/6 with swiftness. And so he put, if you call a null magic stone turn 1, there's no better play than get this right out of the gate, which is true. It's probably, if you can trigger it, probably one of the best 1-drops in the game currently. So it's just obviously works really well inside this deck. It's very synergetic because it's a Dark Elf on top of that, so it also triggers other things as well. Next up, we have Dark Elf Gravekeeper. This is the 1-drop 4/3, and when this card enters the field, search your deck for a Dark Elf and put it into your graveyard. Then shuffle your deck. So this one, he said, basically 75% of the time he puts a Safina, Frayla's right hand, into my graveyard. with this card because you play turn 2 Hilda, Frayla's left hand. That also puts the Safina on boards, and he basically just said that that feels good to get that whole setup ahead of time. And if he has a second one, he usually puts Hilda and Safina in the graveyard to pull out after Frayla's Judgment. This card also powers up Lily and can help you sustain your aggro push into the late game with Frayla's Ruler ability. So yeah, that's a pretty good setup, especially it came out in Time Spinning Witch, so it sort of went under my radar because a lot of people just weren't playing Frayla. And so yeah, no, that's a really good setup card overall. Next up, we have Life Severing Blade. So this is 3-cost quick cast. If a Resonator you control is put into the graveyard from the field this turn, you may pay 2 less to play this card, and it just says destroy target Resonator. He basically said this card is great because your Resonators will be dying a lot, and we've already seen 2 different 1-drops, and there's other cards that could be, you know, effects could be happening to make stuff go into the graveyard, and so this just works really well, and it's just a great card in my opinion in a lot of decks. It's quick cast speed, and so as long as you have a Resonator that at some point is going to die or anything like that, then you're going to get your value out of this, which is pretty awesome. Next up, we have Hilda, Frayla's left hand. So this is a 2-drop 4/5, and when this card enters the field, if you do not control a card named Safina, Frayla's right hand, put target card with that name from your graveyard into the field, and it gains 3/2 as long as your life is 2,000 or less. And so he basically said that Hilda playing this on turn 2 and pulling a Safina for this right hand of your graveyard is really strong. This deck also commonly gets under 2,000 life, making this card even better when you get to that late game or mid-late game essentially. So really good. I mean, it's basically this and Safina are, in my opinion, are must-haves anyways inside of the Frayla deck, so it's not too big of a stretch there. Next we have Lily, the Last Flower. This is a card that I really liked. I thought it was super cool, but it's a 2-cost 5/5, and when this card enters this field, target Resonator your opponent controls gains -2/-2 for each Dark Elf in your graveyard until end of turn. You can then remove a Dark Elf in your graveyard from the game and put a 100/100 counter on this card, and it gains Drain until end of turn. So this one's pretty cool. He said basically that it's an excellent spot removal mid to late game, and Drain also keeps you alive if you get too low. All around fantastic card is what he said. And you can also, there's no limit to how many Dark Elves you can remove in a given turn to get those counters on. And those counters are permanent, the Drain is not, but you can keep removing stuff. Say you remove 3 in one turn, you now have Drain and 3 times, so and you got 3 counters, so she's now an 8/8. She swings in, hits something, and now you've just healed for 2,400 life. So there's cool little things like that that make her a really great card, in addition to her negation that can help easily destroy stuff. Next up we have Frayla, Servant of the Demon. So this is pretty obvious, the 2-drop 6/6. If there's no other Resonators on the field, when it comes in, it gains Swiftness, and whenever it attacks another target Resonator you control may gain +400 attack and Swiftness until end of turn, and then at the next end of turn you banish it. So he said this card is amazing in conjunction with your J-Ruler to quickly give all of your Elves Dark Elf Swiftness and swing in for lethal. This card is a key enabler utility Resonator that you are always happy to see at least one of. So, and basically Oscar loves this card because he puts it in almost every deck he plays. But it's just great in most decks, but it's especially great in this deck. Like he mentioned, it helps give that swiftness to just everything on the field, but it's also a Dark Elf, so it helps in conjunction with all of those other effects. It's a 2-drop, so it works with Faith and Darkness. It just is an all-around well-rounded card inside of this deck. Next we have Dark Riding Hood, Messenger of Truth, 2-drop 6/6, and you can remove a mystery counter from your J-Ruler to invert it. The inverted side is an 8/8 with barrier against fire and darkness. So he said he's still testing this out. The stone base allows for this card to flip pretty frequently, and it can be quite hard for some decks to deal with. And that's true, especially with the barrier against red is a lot of, and darkness is the 2 main colors for removal and different things like that. And the fact that it's just a 2-drop that becomes an 8/8 with barrier, I think is pretty awesome. So yeah, that's pretty straightforward. Next we have Safina, Frayla's right hand. So this is the other side of that equation for this deck. So this one's the 2-drop with 5/4, and when this card enters the field, if you don't control Hilda, then you search your deck for a card with that name and put it into your hand, then shuffle your deck, and it gains 2/3 as long as your life is 2,000 or less. They said the goal is not to play this card from your hand, but to put them into your graveyard with Dark Elf Gravekeeper. And he said he always mulligans these and tries to keep a Dark Elf Gravekeeper and a Hilda in his opening hand if possible. So yeah, pretty straightforward. You know, I already basically went over the combo he had mentioned before, so just great card. Next up, he has Shade Assassin. This is the 1-drop 2/2, and whenever this card deals damage to a resonator, destroy that resonator. And this card gains swiftness as long as you control another Dark Elf. He said it's an excellent way to snipe off big creatures, and it forces your opponent to work around it in the early game. It essentially gets swiftness almost or guaranteed because of the deck you're working with in your ruler, and it's able just to easily kill big stuff. It's yeah, pretty straightforward. It's a cool card. It's something that Joey would love, I think. Next up, we have Heavenly Fruit. Only run one of these, and it's a 1-drop where you discard your hand and you may play resonators from your graveyard this turn. If a card will be put into your graveyard from anywhere, remove it from game instead. And for this one, he put his last name is Fruit. How could I not play a card with fruit in its name? This card is also nuts late game if you can pull it off. So a little bit of flavor there. So and obviously some pretty interesting plays you can play there, especially with how low cost resonators are, and if they're stacked into your graveyard, there could be some pretty interesting stuff in there. And lastly, for the main deck, we got Hilda and Safina. So this is a 4-drop 1,000/1,000, and when this card enters the field, you lose 1,000 life, and when this card leaves the field, you gain 1,000 life, and it gains swiftness, flying, and first strike as long as your life is 1,000 or less. He said the sole purpose of this card is to get in the graveyard with Dark Elf Gravekeeper, and then pull it out with Frayla's J-Ruler Enter ability to swing in for lethal. So that's a pretty good strategy. Basically just try and put it into your graveyard if possible. Hopefully you don't pull it into your hand, and if you do, it's pretty much a dead card unless until late game, and then you can kind of sort of play it. So pretty cool card. I love the art on this card still, but yeah. So moving on to the stone deck. First up, we've got Demonic Soul Stone, which there's 2 of, and this is the one where it's a Darkness Magic Stone to produce black, and you can also pay 2 Void and tap it to deal 100 damage multiplied by the number of Dark Elves you control to each player. So that's a pretty cool stone to put in here. Obviously pretty straightforward. No Magic Stone. Once again, straightforward, and especially in a post-dual Stone Age, anything that produces multiple colors is good, and this one combos with Majin Dark Elf at least, and having lower life helps with a lot of card effects, so you don't have to worry too much about that. And then Stone of the Dark Castle, and this is the one when it enters the field, you get a mystery counter on your J-Ruler. Once again, pretty straightforward. So we'll move to the side deck, and we'll start off with Ceaseless Devotion. So this is the 2-cost quick cast, and as long as a resonator as target resonator you control is in the field, if damage will be dealt to you, it's dealt to that resonator instead until end of turn. And so for this one, he said it's for the IU matchup, and it also protects you from a big burn spell. So you can play it in reaction to them swinging in with IU, or if they played, I don't know, Deep Impact or something like that. It's a way to redirect to a resonator you control, and then it goes to the graveyard. This is only a 2-cost, so you might still have will left over to play the 1-cost chant now to destroy a resonator they control now. So pretty cool card. Next up was 2 Black Tears. Destroy all resonators with total cost 2 or 1 or less. He said it's against the IMU matchup or any deck that runs lots of inverse resonators. If I put these in, I will pull out at least 3 of my inverse resonators in my main deck. So obviously, like you saw in the main deck, there was a couple inverse resonators. So if you put in Black Tears in the sideboard, he'll grab a couple other cards from here to sort of offset that as well. Next up, we have Azazel, the Fallen Angel of Gloom. So this is the 4-cost 900/1,000 with flying that you can pay 2 void less if your opponent has 1 or less cards in your hand. And it enters, you choose 1. Look at the top 2 cards of your deck and put a card from among them into your hand and the rest in your graveyard. Or target 2 resonators your opponent controls and your opponent banishes 1 of them. I really like this card. This was a lot of fun in sealed format as well. But he said that he has this in here because he's still testing this one against like fast decks that get real low on hand size pretty quickly, sort of an almost like roundabout anti-aggro type of deal, and also could combo well with this with some of the other cards in the side deck as well. Next up, we have Dark Riding Hood. So this is the 3-cost 7/8, and it gains whenever this card deals damage to a resonator. Destroy that resonator as long as your life is 2,000 or less. Gains Swiftness if your life is 1,000 or less, and when it enters the field, you may remove 2 mystery counters from your J ruler, and if you do, remove target resonator from the game. And when this card attacks, it deals 200 damage to target player or resonator, and you gain 200 life. And so this one, he said it's an aggro for against the aggro matchup, and he did say he's still on the fence on this card. I really like this card personally. The 3 black isn't too big of a barrier in this monocolor format going forward in New Frontiers, so that is no longer a hindrance. So I personally think it's super cool. And next up, we have Evil Elemental Rising. It's a 1-cost quick cast where you remove all the cards in your opponent's graveyard from the game, and players cannot chase to this card. And so he said this is just general graveyard hate. Pretty straightforward. You guys should know this card. He also runs 3 Look of Corruption in his sideboard, where you look at your opponent. It's the better thought control with the Awakening as well. And so he said it's for the control matchup. You pull out keyboard clears or bounce cards and generally disrupt their strategies. So yeah, once again, pretty straightforward. This is a really great, really strong card. Lastly, we have Majin Subjugation. So this is a 1-cost chant. As an additional cost to play this card, banish a resonator, and you search your deck for a Wicked Spirit with total cost X or less, where X is the banish resonator's total cost +2, and put it into the field, then shuffle your deck. So he said that for this one, he'll usually banish a rested resonator that just attacked to pull out a Majin Dark Elf or a Frayla, serving a Demon Fire to swing in for extra damage, and it's just extra spice in the sideboard, he said, essentially. So there's some pretty cool plays you could do with it, and I like it. Only 1 in here, so it's not like something you're going to be consistently relying on or looking out for and stuff like that, but it's just a cool thing to have, essentially. So yeah, that's the deck. He basically said that the deck is loads of fun. He has a lot of fun with it and does really well at locals. He says it'll never be a top tier deck, but definitely can hold its own against those like middling and close to higher tier decks if played correctly and stuff like that. So I can definitely see that there's a lot of cool synergy going inside of this deck, which I really like, and that lends itself to a lot of really strong plays and counters, especially when your opponents aren't looking out for a Frayla deck or Frayla plays and stuff like that. This can really catch them off guard and either have to give them an auto loss game 1 or at least give them a run for their money and stuff. And it just adds some difference, especially in this format where we have a lot of diversity. It's cool just to even add more to it, essentially, at this point. So I really like it. Like I said, the deck list is in the description below, so make sure you check that out, as well as his written out version of what I just went over here. Thanks a lot to Jason Fruit for submitting this deck list and for supporting us over on patreon.com/tcgscrubs. And yeah, thanks you guys for tuning in, and we'll see you guys next time.